there's so much permission, and I feel like I've shed some of, I've got a ways to go, but maybe shed some of my self-consciousness or fear of judgment. You know, in Europe I did feel a lot of, you know, it's like what you put out there is you're going to be judged by it, and it's, you know, the dance world is pretty hierarchical, and there's a lot more opportunity, but there's also a lot more opportunity to fall on your face. So I do feel permission and support here, and that's been great.
Well, okay, that sounds like a beginning of an interesting conversation. I think we may be ready to move into our next phase, which involves all of us doing something, and Jessica will tell us.
Yes. So what we are going to do is that sort of Mary and I and the panelists have distilled down the conversation into 3 questions, which are sort of jumping off points. And 4 questions, sorry. And each question is going to have its table, and we have people who have agreed to lead the discussion about these questions. So table 1, which is right over here, Carol is going to lead a conversation about what is semantics to you. How do you use this word? Can we get closer to a definition? And I think if we end up with, you know, 5 or 7 or 10 different definitions, that's okay, but we'll sort of start delving into that, and that's at table number 1 right here. Table number 2, back in the corner, Lisa and Anne are going to lead a conversation about this idea about semantics supporting social change. So, you know, very much inherent in the Bay Area is this idea of social change and arts and activism. How does this relate to what you do? Does this resonate for you in your practice? So that's the conversation that's happening in that corner of the room over there. Yeah, great, with Anne. And then in this corner over here, Kathy and Hillary are going to be leading a conversation, and forgive me, this is a long question, so I'm just going to read through it. If one way of describing the combination of semantics and dance can create is an extending of the dance form, how does this show up for you? Do you think of semantics as a tool for extending dance technique, dance compositional forms, or the gray area in between, or something else? So the way that I put this when we were talking about it before is this about making more compelling performers, or is this about making more compelling performance? Or is it both? And how does it feed in? Or do you think of dance as a tool for extending semantics? So that's the big, broad conversation that's happening in that corner. And then over here at table number 4, we're going to talk about the idea of practice. What kind of practice do you have, and how do dance and semantics contribute to it? What are the goals of your practice? So thinking about this practice over time, as a regular thing, developing relationships, to the practice, to the work, and to teachers. So those are the 4 conversations, and I invite you to stray as far as you'd like from those initial questions, but use them as a jumping off point. What you get to do now is to choose a table, and you're going to get about 20 minutes to talk, and then you're going to get to move to another table. So you won't get to talk about all of the questions, but you'll get to talk about at least 2 of them. And if we have one table that ends up being really big, we may start a satellite group in the back with some pillows, and that will be fine too. You'll have a chance, so it's sort of like musical chairs. There are a couple things that I want to say, which is that we have in this gathering something called the law of 2 feet, which means that you have 2 feet and you can use them. So if you don't like the conversation that you're having and you'd rather be in someone else's conversation, no one will be offended if you decide to get up and move. We also have a volunteer at each table taking notes. They're going to blog on the Counterpulse website, so I invite you to come back and join the conversation online. But know that we're not going to attribute names to the notes, so they're really about just capturing the essence of the conversation. After we're done, we'll come back together. We're not going to do a report back, but what we're going to do is sort of have each table sort of bring up what are the questions that you were left with. What was the most surprising or juicy thing that someone else said? And we'll go from there and talk a little bit longer. Does everyone understand what we're doing? Question?
Yeah, because I was here over here at table 3 of that case.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna paraphrase. Table 1 over here is the definition of semantics. What is it and how does it relate to what we do? Table number 2 in the back corner is semantics and social change, arts and activism. This table over here is somatics as a dance-generating material and some dance influencing the practice of somatics. And then this table right here is the idea of practice and ongoing work in relationship to that. Did that help?
Thank you.
Good. Great. So you can go ahead and find your tables.
Said that she notices that a somatic dance changes her sense of time, that there's an expanded or extended sense of time. And I would second that from having seen a lot of dance that has been influenced by somatics. I think that there's, and we could call it an aesthetic, I think, that might be challenging to some audiences in terms of their attention span of maybe watching something that develops more slowly or something more minimal that goes on for a longer period of time. I mean, that's something I've seen done a lot in Europe that I really appreciate because it brings me into my body as an audience in a different way. You know, kind of takes me out of that mind of, okay, what's next? You know, entertain me. And it feels more participatory, and I go through a lot more changes while I'm watching and more aware of how I'm participating in my experience. So that might be one answer.
Yeah.
Other questions you were left with? I mean,
Woohoo! Yeah. Well, the question, just a nice question came up at this table about why is somatic showing up in these times? Which is a nice question. And am I allowed to say something surprising?
absolutely.
What was surprising? That it almost could sound like, it could sound cultish. And I was also just about to respond to why maybe it would differ from being, how it could not be a cult. But then somebody else commented here that it's true. I mean, when I was in the Alexander community and learning, it was like, I feel like I have a way of stereotyping Alexander technique teachers like myself. No, not myself, but other Alexander teachers walking around with rods up their asses, you know, and looking down on everybody from up here. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. But then I think about all the Feldenkrais people, and they walk around kind of lubricated and like we're loose jointed and we're it, you know. So each system kind of goes, or PMC people, you know, it's like, yeah, we feel and we have all the systems working together and we're on. So anyway, I mean, that was just an interesting question. I was about to contemplate on why I think somatics can't become a cult, but then I had those images. So anyway,
Fantastic.
it's a great question.
Quick comment. I was thinking of the semantics, cultivating. So when you cultivate something, you must go through a phase of cult.
That's great.
The cult bit makes me think about the politics table here and what is power. And I think a lot of power is belief, of believing that Feldenkrais is really useful. So somehow get this inflated sense, underinflated, overinflated, just right for the context, for the people you're teaching. And then people can have different beliefs and they have arguments, debates, and can support each other or help each other grow.
I just have a little problem. My little problem with the whole cult thing is that then somehow, once again, the technique is becoming more important than the person. And this is not, that's why I don't think it can really happen.
And I have an answer to the question about why now, which relates to the question about what is a person or why a person or valuing the person. So, cycle back 100 years ago when there was also a lot of political turmoil and also huge shift in what we were calling society, from freeing the serfs only in late 19th century to like major wars and major revolutions happening at the turn of the century.